Welcome to Illuminati Silver. We tell the truth about silver. Today is Sunday the 24th of November 2019. And yesterday, in addition to our Gold and Silver Weekly Update, we also published a video entitled Sterling's Rise May Result in Lower Gold and Silver Prices. Now we've placed links to both our update and this video in the description box below. Now, in this video podcast, we highlighted the fact that should the Conservative Party win the 12th of December UK general election with a sufficient majority to enable Boris Johnson to pass his proposed Brexit Exit strategy through Parliament, then we may very well see sterling strengthen from its already near recent highs of $1.28 to the pound to at least $1.35 to the pound, and the effect that will have on gold and silver prices. We quote a number of contributors to this argument, though we also, in fairness, have to admit that a Conservative majority is not a foregone conclusion. Or is it? Well, I am pleased to have one of our inner sanctum experts on geopolitical affairs, controversially Greg, on the line to discuss the UK general election and to ascertain how he believes the results are going to end up on the 12th of December and what this means for Brexit moving forward, and also, therefore, how that in turn will affect sterling and the price of gold and silver in sterling terms. Greg, good morning.
Good morning, Richard, though I question whether we can call this a good morning. It's cold, wet, miserable, the end of November, and misty.
Very typical British morning. Greg, UK general election, 12th of December. What are your thoughts on where the various parties are heading? And so far, how would you call the result?
I'm not sure anybody can be absolutely certain because it depends on whether somebody falls into a bear trap and gets trashed. But there seems to be every reason to believe there will be a Tory majority because the more the public see of Corbyn and even more so Joe Swinson of the Liberal Democrats, the more unpopular they seem to become. To listen to all the parties, the Labour Party, without a doubt, under Corbyn and McDonnell, and I believe there's probably somebody else in the Labour Party, but they're the only people who seem to be allowed to speak at the moment. They've seemed to have gagged most of their people to keep them out of putting their foot in it, and they're leaving putting their foot in it to those two. Seem to be promising a great giveaway of our money. Now, to me, it just smacks of buying votes. If you promise every sector of the community that you're going to give them billions, what is the effect? They are not going to be able to honour the commitments they're making. They're talking in billions. Well, let's look at this glibly used political word, billion. Well, a billion seconds ago was 32 years ago. A billion minutes ago was 2,000 years. A billion hours ago was 114,000 years ago. Long before mankind had even started itinerant farming, which was about 20,000 years ago. And a billion years ago, sorry, a billion days ago was 2.7 million years. Now, in the context of anything, a billion is a very big number. And yet, Labour particularly are talking in multiple billions.
Well, 83 billion to be precise. The estimates are 83 billion increase in government spending by 2023 and 2024. And they propose to pay for that by taxing top earners and businesses. So will that be enough
end up taxing everyone?
Indeed. Will that be enough to attract extra votes, do you think, though? Because what he's promising certainly sounds attractive if you believe you're going to be one of the beneficiaries.
Indeed it does, but he had a panic that seems to have occurred overnight, last night. He's now offering women who missed out on pensions, 3.5 million of them, a huge additional pension pot. I wonder who else he'll find he's missed out on the great Christmas giveaway of money he has to steal from us to spend. The only reason there's any ability to raise money is because ever since the 13 unlucky years of Labour's last period of misrule, the Tory party have made themselves very unpopular with the man in the street, for lack of a better generic, by deciding to introduce austerity to desperately try and put some money back in the coffers so that their policies can, from now on, actually be funded without obscene levels of borrowing. So although the Tory manifesto has not been published yet, it's being published within the next hour or two, it has been heavily leaked, and most of it would appear to be sensible concepts like more investment in the NHS, though I question if it's actually money the NHS is short of, or an ability to cut waste. It's very easy to paint figures like hospital beds and closed wards. However, I well remember a few years back, an operation, even a fairly minor one, and you would stay in hospital for at least a week. Now, many forms of quite sophisticated surgery are done laparoscopically or robotically, and you're out of hospital the following day. Quite complicated operations are actually done on a walk-in basis and out a few hours later. So there are less hospital beds needed. And one of the problems of the country is we have an aging population. So more and more hospital beds are being occupied by social service problems, i.e. the elderly who cannot be released back into the community because of their infirmity and inability to live on their own. Mm-hmm. So this leads to an element of bed blocking. Yes, running a health service is a massive and complex task.
So coming back to what you called his bribes, Corbyn's bribes, what is he actually promising to give the British public if he's elected Prime Minister with this 83 billion over the next 4 or 5 years?
Let us take just one example. He has promised to build 100,000 new homes a year. Well, that's farcical. We haven't got enough building companies. We haven't got the land allocated. We haven't got sufficient builders. We don't have the bricks. We don't have the blocks. We don't have the equipment that is needed, and let's look at Labour's actual record. The one area of Britain where they have a devolved responsibility to deal with house building that is totally under the control of the Labour Party is in the region of Wales. And in Wales, they didn't build any kind of proportion of that 100,000 homes. They built last year 59 houses. His promise is risible. And surely the British public cannot be so stupid they'll fall for it. And when you look closely at every other area that he's promising, it's equally as fantastical.
So on that basis, Greg, just to give our listeners a perspective, there are 650 seats that are available. Well, 649, because one is taken by the Speaker, which usually is not contested, but we can discuss that later. Now, of those 650 seats, so far, 298 are Conservative, 243 are Labour, so they're the two major parties. But then we move down to the Scottish National Party, which is the third largest, with 35 seats. Independents represent 24 seats. Liberal Democrats, which you've mentioned, 20 seats. And by the way, you used the word Tories earlier on. Just for clarity, Tories are Conservatives, yes? Just so that people know the slang that we use.
Just for clarity, then, the yes. Conservative and Unionist Party are referred to as the Tories.
Right. So we've got 20 Liberal Democrats, which you've mentioned, 10 Democratic Unionists, 7 Sinn Féin, 5 the Independent Group for Change, 4 Plaid Cymru, which solely represent Wales, 1 Green Party member, and there are 2 vacancies seats at the moment. Now, one person who seems to be grabbing the headlines at the moment, unsurprisingly, is Nigel Farage. And he's been quoted this week. We've seen a picture of him signing a large display board under the heading, Farage signs contract with voters. What's that all about, and will it carry any weight?
Farage can sign anything he likes. It will never happen. His popularity of his newborn cult, a limited company, which he and a couple of other directors owns, called the Brexit Party, is light on detail, long on rhetoric, has quit to permit the Tories in Tory seats not to risk losing Brexit completely, because he's aware that he's not going to have sufficient number of seats to do anything but wreck the possibility of a Tory majority. He makes this claim that in Labour seats he can destabilise Labour. I very much question that. I think he'll take more likely to take votes from disgruntled Tories who are fed up at being let down in the non-delivery of Brexit when it was promised for the end of March this year, and it still hasn't happened. Mm-hmm. I cannot see him being of any significance or any consequence. And the great danger he faces with this cult of his, which has now dropped to between 2 and 3% support, which is down there with what used to be David Such and the Screaming Lord Such party.
The Monster Raving Loony Party, I think.
Yeah, that's right. I never paid much attention to it, so it's hardly surprising I've forgotten what it was called.
Well, interestingly, there was a poll out on Saturday for the Observer newspaper by Opinion. And they state that the support for the Conservative Party stands at 47%, Labour 28%, Liberal Democrats 12%, and the Brexit Party at 3%, which ties into what you're actually saying. Now, there is evidence to suggest that Liberal Democrats and Labour and a few of the other parties are beginning to form some form of alliance to fight against the Conservatives, because they predominantly are Remainers as far as Brexit is concerned. Do you see any evidence that such an alliance is actually being created? And how do you think that could affect the Conservative Party's chances of success?
The leader of the Labour Party has categorically said they will do no deal with anybody.
Mm-hmm.
However, you can't trust a word he says, because he and his party voted overwhelmingly to support the decision of the British people in the referendum of 2016. Mm-hmm. They voted overwhelmingly for the Article 50 Act, which was the act to take us out of the European Union. They voted to start with overwhelmingly in favour of negotiations to leave, and they have reneged on every single one of those promises. At the moment, they're promising they won't do a deal with anyone, but you can't count on that because it's the Labour Party. Mm-hmm. Their promises aren't worth the hot air they're spouted on. Mm-hmm. They're just for effect. I think it is probable that if Mr. Corbyn and his band of quasi-Marxists and extremists got anywhere within sniffing distance of 10 Downing Street, they'd do a deal with the devil if it meant they could get the keys.
Right. Well, interestingly, you somewhat maligned the previous Labour government, which in the main, not totally, but in the main, was run by Tony Blair, who is considerably far right of Jeremy Corbyn. So, and of course, you quite rightly, in my view at least, condemn Corbyn's new party as being quite extreme left. Are you just typically anti-socialist, or because obviously if you're condemning the right wing of the Labour Party and you're condemning the extreme left wing of the Labour Party, it suggests a degree of bias, Greg, rather than objectivity?
It's hard not to be biased when you have, since you quoted Tony Blair, a man who lied to our allies, arranged for Jack Straw to lie to Colin Powell in the United Nations, lied about weapons of mass destruction, lied about the ability of Sheikh Hussein, Saddam Hussein, to deliver weapons of mass destruction, was personally responsible for hundreds of thousands of deaths in Iraq, and who is still pontificating, although he was tossed out of office by his own supporters to be replaced by Brown, who then presided over the bankrupting of the banks during the bank crash, who failed to do anything other than bail out seats, particularly Northern Rock, which was surrounded by Labour seats. How am I supposed to trust these people when again and again and again they do this? And when you say bias, the Labour Party is seen as the Socialist Party. I have voted Socialist all my life in every election that I've voted in, i.e. the party that provides the socialist support to people, i.e. social welfare, social medicine, and social standards of fair play. The Labour Party has no right to lay claim to being socialist if you're talking in socialist with a small c. It's just a very clever label. Just as Labour is nothing more than neural linguistic programming and selecting a misleading word to imply that they represent Labour, the labourers of this country, the labour force. They do not. They're mostly very wealthy, Islington dwelling or similar, with children at private schools if they've succeeded. They are totally hypocritical.
Well, the only thing I would pick you up on there is socialist with a small s, not a small c, Greg. Otherwise, I'll have people claiming
Did I say C?
You said c. I'll have people claiming you can't spell. Okay. Well,
It wouldn't be far wrong.
Coming back then to the Conservative Party and its prospects for success. There's a poll announced today in the Independent newspaper by an organisation, BMG. Now, they've questioned, albeit it's a relatively small sample, but they've questioned 1,663 voters, and they put the Conservatives 13 points ahead of Labour. So not as much as the opinion poll, but certainly still a significant lead. And it was announced just after the first week of the general election being called that the Conservatives have raised 26 times more donations than the Labour Party had achieved up till that point. So when you started this conversation and said, you know, it's not guaranteed that the Tories will win, certainly the polls are suggesting that it's going to be a significant win. And if that is the case, what does that then mean for, let's be perfectly blunt about this, the most important piece of legislation as far as the UK is concerned, and has been for the last few years? What does this mean for Brexit, getting that through Parliament and effecting an exit from the European Union?
I think we must first of all face the fact the polls are notoriously wildly inaccurate, unpredictably wildly inaccurate. They've predicted majorities for one side or another and found that it went completely against them in the past. It's a matter of two things. One, avoiding groupthink, and there is a tendency amongst pollsters to interview people like them, the groupthink problem. There's also an awful lot of feedback amongst journalists in the bubble of Westminster, where they will be saying things based on their preconceived biases. So beware of polls. As for integrity and who will make it, it only takes a situation where a frontline member of any of those parties walks into a bear trap. We saw what happened to Prince Andrew, the Duke of York, who was bumping along quite successfully with life until there was a populist trial by media, and he has not only fallen from grace, he's effectively lost his job, he has rattled the royalist tree, and he has caused mayhem. Yet to date, I've not actually seen so much as an allegation of an act of criminality on his part, and nor of him concealing any specific thing that is provable. Yes, he was seen with a 17-year-old girl. Well, 17, the Labour Party was trying to reduce the age of consent for sex to 9 at one stage. So I don't think the Tories or Labour can count on the polls in any way. I do believe that the Tories will win a small majority.
Mm-hmm.
It's very difficult nowadays to win a large majority. It's almost impossible for the Labour Party to win a large majority because of the SNP, the Scottish Nationalist Party, who, as far as I'm concerned, having had my parental home in Scotland for well over 20 years, and having an affinity and concern for Scotland as a result, I see the SNP as a vicious, vile, lunatic fringe of basically those in society who are either so far above the problems of everyday life, senior academics and the like, or so far below it that any change might be better.
Mm.
There is no sane groundswell for independence in Scotland. There is no sane groundswell for independence in Wales. Just a lunatic fringe.
So to achieve that overall majority, the Conservatives obviously need 325 or 326 seats, which means they've got to have 27 or 28 more seats than they currently have. So you believe that is indeed possible?
I think it's possible. I think it will be a struggle, even to the last minute. I think they could get as high as 335, 340, but it is unlikely.
And what does this then mean for Brexit?
I think that there will be a number of, once Parliament sits again, the Tories will hold the government. It will be inevitable they hold it for the next 4 or 5 years, or almost inevitable. Brexit will be an obvious action. It's been far too heavily promised by the whole of the Tory party. Every single candidate has signed up to it as an individual. I believe it will become so inevitable that the members of the Labour Party, a number of whom realise that Brexit is the democratic decision of the British people, they will side with the government. I think Brexit will pass over the line on in January or even at the end of December with a fair majority. I'm not going to say it will be a large one because most MPs fall into that bubble category of when their career at Westminster ends for any reason, they will be looking to a job as a lobbyist or as some sort of apparatchik in the European Union. They will be voting in. There will be many who will vote in their own personal vested interest.
Mm-hmm. So
anybody in Scotland who votes against Brexit has got to be somewhat foolish, because on leaving, should they leave these United Kingdoms, there's no doubt that they would have several years in the absolute wilderness, where they were not part of the United Kingdom. They were confronted with a hard border because they were outside of the United Kingdom. Many of the industries in Scotland would relocate closer to their main market, which is south of the Scottish border. Many of the businesses in Scotland, major manufacturing businesses, are subsidized and propped up by British money,
Mhm.
not English, not Scottish, but British money as suppliers to these United Kingdoms. But the second that they broke away, they would lose that advantage. Scotland would not have the negotiating power on the world stage when it came to such things as oil contracts, defense of its fisheries, its own defense force, and it would just, unfortunately and tragically, which is why I'm against it, wither.
Right.
One of the reasons for a national health service is we all live on the same island. Now, the second that there is devolution to the extent of independence, the National Health Service will fall away in those countries. They will have their own National Health Service with different standards. The same could tragically happen in Wales, where already the health service is in great difficulty under Labour management. The problem of the health service under those circumstances is one would have a policy, shall we say, of vaccinating against MMR, measles. The other would have followed the idiotic line of not doing so, just as they've done in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. I've never quite been sure what was democratic about Congo, but never mind, where they have recently had 5,000 deaths from measles because they stopped inoculating against measles, mumps, and rubella for small children.
Well, Greg, time is running against us now. So before we finish, let us assume, therefore, the Conservatives win. Let us assume they win with the small majority that you're advocating at the moment. And let us also assume that the Brexit proposals are actually passed. Now, on that basis, a number of economic commentators and so-called experts are claiming, therefore, sterling will rise quite substantially. The figures vary. At the moment, there's $1.28 to the pound. Some of the more modest economic experts are claiming sterling will rise to $1.35, and some of the less conservative ones are claiming it will rise to $1.50. Now, for our listeners, that will have a significant impact on gold and silver prices in sterling terms, not in dollar terms, but in sterling terms, which would mean that their prices would fall by at or around 5+%. Maybe as high as 10 if the 150 actually comes about. What do you think? And I appreciate you're not an economic analyst, you're more a geopolitical analyst, but what's your opinion as to what will happen to sterling subject to a Tory election victory?
I think the moment that there's a victory, there will be a marked stabilization of the pound, because the uncertainty will, to some extent, be over. And with the Tory majority putting through, or majority in collusion with the saner voices in the House of Commons, pushing through Brexit to honour democracy rather than wreck Britain's entire democratic structure, because although Jeremy Corbyn is promising a second referendum, don't forget, he promised he'd honour the last one and he didn't. So he'll have another one. And what will he have if it goes against him? Oh, a third one? A fourth one? It's just farcical. The only way that democracy in this country can have any meaning whatsoever, whatever the outcome of the election, is for Brexit to be delivered. A second vote is not Brexit. A second vote is not honouring our democracy.
Greg, on that note, we shall leave it. Thank you so much. Really appreciate your time this morning. I know it hasn't been long that you've actually woken up. And so on that basis, I'll let you doze for the rest of the day.
I wish.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye, Richard.
So there we have it. Greg, though cautious, agrees that, subject to no scandal or major error being committed, the Conservatives will win the UK general election with a small majority and will get Brexit passed. He agrees sterling will consolidate its recent rise and could indeed go higher, the natural conclusion of which will lead to lower gold and silver prices as far as sterling is concerned, which could present a very good opportunity for those looking to buy more. We must not forget, however, that Britain leaving the EU will leave a large hole in the EU's budget, at a time when the global economy is moving potentially towards recession, and the fault lines in the euro and the increasing difficulties for Germany funding the EU will be exacerbated, particularly as there is still no answer to immigration, not just from Syria, but a third of the people in sub-Saharan Africa who wish to relocate to Europe. These difficulties are likely to reflect badly on the euro, which in its own terms may well lead to a rise in gold and silver prices as funds leave the euro markets and head towards safe haven investments. But it will also likely lead to the strengthening of sterling, although we will, for a number of years, be liable to a greater or lesser extent in propping up the failing economy of Europe, if not directly, then indirectly. Thank you so much for listening. If you haven't already done so, please subscribe to our channel and press the bell sign so that you are notified of future videos as they are published. We hope you have found this video interesting and informative, and if so, please give it a thumbs up and share it on social media. Please ensure that you have subscribed to our channel and press the bell sign so that you are notified of any future videos. Also, kindly visit our website at illuminatisilver.com, and if you haven't already done so, please subscribe either as a free or paying member for regular email updates and offers. Disclaimer: Illuminati Silver owners come from a background of banking, international wealth management and economics. Having now retired from these worlds, we are not qualified to give investment advice. Therefore, this and other productions must not be deemed to be giving such advice and merely represent the personal views of its owners.